Okay, so let's do homework problem number 9. And we have to find the missing side of the triangle. First of all, let's talk about how we know how to label each side of a triangle. The hypotenuse is always the diagonal side. It's always across from the 90 degrees. The opposite and the adjacent sides make a 90 degrees. Those two sides are perpendicular to each other. They're called the legs. The opposite leg never touches the angle. It's across from the angle. Another word to use for opposite is across. Adjacent is the leg that touches the angle. It's next to. Another word for adjacent is next to. So when we go to solve these problems, the first step I always do is circle the angle. So here's the first problem, number 9. The angle in this problem is 35. So I'm going to circle that angle just so I know what angle I'm referring to. So here's our angle. Next step is I label my sides according to that angle. So if I look at x is one of the perpendicular sides. It's across from the angle. The side in which x is on does not touch the angle 35. So I'm going to label that side as my opposite side. I'm going to label it with an O. The x is on the opposite side of the angle. The 20 is on the diagonal, or the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always the diagonal one across from the 90 degrees. So the sides that I'm given are opposite and hypotenuse. So I look at my formula sheet. Here are my 3 trig ratios. I have to decide which ratio has an opposite and a hypotenuse in the ratio. That would be the first trig function listed right here, sine. The sine ratio has opposite over hypotenuse, so I use that ratio. That's how I decided which ratio to use. We were given the opposite and the hypotenuse. Can't use cosine because I don't know the adjacent. Can't use tangent because I don't know the adjacent side. So I decided on sine. So to set up the equation, I start with sine. Then I put the angle after the sine. So sine 35 degrees equals, now I set up a ratio of the opposite side divided by the hypotenuse. So there's my ratio, x divided by 20. Now, I need to get rid of the 20 so I can solve for x, get x by itself. So I need to multiply both sides by 20. So times 20 on this side, and times 20 on this side. The reason why I do that, when I multiply by 20 on both sides, is now I've canceled out these two 20s, so I'm left with x all by itself. I now type this into my calculator. So I go to my calculator, and I'm going to type in 20 sine 35. Without putting anything in between the 20 and the sine, the calculator knows we're trying to multiply 20 times sine 35. This is going to give me x. X is 11.47. Now, if you didn't get that number and you're using your TI calculator, you want to check your mode. Remember, when you do these problems, you want your mode to be in degree. So I hit mode. Make sure you highlight degree. Make sure degree is highlighted. To highlight it, press enter when it's on degree. So if you didn't get 11.47, try it again, now that you're in degree mode. If you're using the calculator on your computer, you can use sine, tan, and cosine. If you go to View, Scientific, here are your buttons for sine, cosine, and tan. Now when you do this on your calculator, some calculators do it backwards. You have to enter in 35 and then sine. So 35 and then sine. Now I need to multiply by 20 times 20. And I get 11.47. So some calculators you have to type it in backwards. This is the case for the calculator on your computer. So what did we just find? We found the length of the missing side, x. X equals 11.47. Let's do another example. Okay, so here's problem number 10 from your homework. Same steps. Again, circle your angle, 32. There's my angle. It's always inside the triangle. The angle is always inside the triangle. Now label the sides outside the triangle. Right away I know the 17. It's across from the 90, and it's the diagonal one. So this is my hypotenuse. Because I know this is the hypotenuse, I've narrowed down my choices to either sine or cosine. Because tangent does not have hypotenuse. Now let's label the x. X touches the angle and it's one of the perpendicular legs. Since it touches the angle, it has to be the adjacent side. So I'm going to label this A for adjacent. So now I look at my formula sheet, blue formula sheet, got to use it. Which one has A and H? Which ratio uses the adjacent and the hypotenuse? We know we can use cosine. Cosine uses adjacent and the hypotenuse. So I'm going to set up my equation. So we decided it was cosine. After the cosine, we have to write the angle. So cosine 32 degrees equals, now we set up the ratio. Cosine ratio is adjacent divided by hypotenuse. So we write x over 17. Now to get x by itself, we have to multiply by 17 on both sides. The reason why we do this is so the 17s cancel out. We multiplied them on both sides so the 17s cancel out. Now that they've canceled out, we now have x by itself. So I type into my calculator 17 cosine 32. Remember, if you're using a different calculator or the computer calculator, you have to type it in backwards. 32 cosine 17. And we get 14.42. It's 42 because the 6 tells us to round it up to 14.42. We just found the length of the missing side, x, equals 14.42. Now remember, if we set up the ratio in a different case, one of your homework problems might have this, and the x is on the denominator. If we set up the ratio and the x is on the denominator, remember when we go to type it in, we have to do 17 divided by cosine 32.